couple different platforms that are up right now. We have a version on Zoom, if you've gotten a link to that, but we also are up on Facebook Live, so you can check that out too. We will be saving questions till the end, so feel free to type them into the chat. Or if you're having any difficulties hearing or seeing anything, let us know and we'll do our best to remedy it. But we'll get started right away. So our speaker tonight, if you can see him in the back there, is Mr. Jay Black, and he's going to talk to us all about the various weapons of the Civil War on both the Confederate and the Union sides, with many arms from his own collection, with a few helpers from elsewhere. But I'll let him do all the talking, and enjoy.
Good evening, folks. As Ryan said, we're here tonight to discuss the weaponry of the Civil War. Back at the beginning of the Civil War, as you know, they were fighting with what they called the muskets. The first one that would come up on the screen, you'll see the brown Bess. That is a muzzle loader, smooth bore. It had a massive 72 caliber ball that would be fired from this. The idea of them, though, was the fact that they were limited to weather and other capabilities that affected the ball once it left the barrel. Being the smooth bore, the distance was not very far, accuracy was low, there is no sights on the gun. You have how it fired is you had a flintstone up here on the bird's beak. Henceforth is where the name came from, cocking the gun. Also, you have a pan that in order to fire the gun, you would have to pour some powder into the pan, close the cover for the pan with the exposed powder. Then you had a stall that would slip over so your hammer could not cause a spark. As you put the gun down, loaded the powder through the barrel, put the ball in, and as with all muzzle loaders, using the ramrod to ram the bullet down. One thing you'll notice, the majority of these weapons, probably one of the most important parts of these weapons is this ramrod. Without the ramrod, you cannot load these weapons. Now as you come up, now you can take your stall off, you can cock the gun to full, now you're able to fire the brown Bess musket. This is a sample of the ball. That's a 72 caliber. It's about the size of a penny with a solid ball. Next, similar to the brown Bess, is a Charlottesville. It is still a flintlock with the muzzle loader. Now, with the beginning of the war, they got in, they needed accuracy, they needed distance. I don't have one here, but they come out with the Pennsylvania, Kentucky rifles. The idea was they were still flintlocks, but they had sights and they had rifling in the barrels now. So now it still was the round ball, but they actually could reach out and hit targets farther away. Then we'll go on to the Enfield, which is the start of the percussion cap. They're still muzzle load. You load from the end of the barrel. Now these were 58 caliber. They had the rifle barrels into them for distance and accuracy. The difference being is with the percussion cap, you no longer had to worry about the rain getting into the powder, into the flash pan, because it relied on a percussion cap that once you had the gun loaded from the barrel, you could come back, cock the gun to half cock, and put a cap on to the nipple back here then you could full cock, and then you could fire the gun. So it eliminated a lot of the problems with the weather permitting of the muskets. The Enfields were a British made, along with the Enfields of the North and the South. You also had one that they called the Springfield. Springfield was actually made in the U.S. It's based after the British Enfield, but it is a Springfield 58 caliber. They were very close to efficiency, as far as accuracy, distance. Simply, they were made pretty close to being the same thing. You found those both in North and the South in formations. The reason being is because of shooting over the top of each other's shoulders while they were in the lines of the formation. Now, when they, take per chance, they got into a skirmish line, you also had rangers, you had basically marauders on both sides, scouts. They couldn't use the long-barreled weapons. So then they would introduce the shorter two-band rifles that were shorter in length, same caliber, fired the same ammunition. Basically loaded everything identically, other than the fact that they were a shorter version, more easier to handle. Then they also had the, just the next one. This one is a Richmond. It is a extreme short one for skirmishers. It still fired the same 58 caliber as the Springfield and the Enfield. During the warfare of the Civil War, the warfare changed a lot because you started out with something that you had 40 to 50 yards that you really could call accurate. They could reach out in volleys of up to 175 yards to be effective. But weather permitting in that, into your percussion rifles, you could reach out there 300-400 yards. They had rifles that could range out to effectively 500 to 600 yards. As we go down through the next on the screen, I don't know, technical difficulty. We'll go on to talk about the idea that everything so far is single shot, muzzle load, 3 to 4 rounds, a minute max. Some are 2 to 3. Springfield, Enfield are usually 2 to 3 with a trained individual that could fight and shoot that many times. Out there in battle though, with somebody else shooting at you, the odds of being able to fire that often is not. We'll go into the Sharps. The idea of the Sharps, Maynard, and the Spencer, you had infantry troops that had to carry weapons that had to fire long distance and that on the ground, but you also had horse soldiers, cavalry that needed weapons. The idea was, even a short one, there's no way that a horse soldier could load and fire a musket from the horse and load it and try to maintain a muzzle loader with 2 hands and still control the horse. So what they did is they came up with a strap that they could put on their shoulder, and it would hang down. And basically what they would do is they went to Sharps was the first that was a breech load that they could actually load the gun from the breech back here instead of a muzzle loader. Very short. It was able to be carried around. It took a paper cartridge with the bullet in the paper and the powder. It would insert into the magazine from the rear. The falling block would come back up and cut the paper cartridge off in the back, exposing the powder to the percussion cap located on the side of the chamber. The hammer would down strike it, it would then ignite the powder, sending the bullet down. These ran, I believe, 50 to 54 caliber. They were one of the first ones that was breech fed, but they did have the paper cartridge. One of the downsides to them is having that falling block into the gun, cutting that paper. It allowed paper and it allowed powder down into the chamber, causing fires inside the gun. They had to come up with another one. This one is the Maynard, similar to the Sharps in the fact that it is breech loaded. Difference being is it had no stock out here. When you activated the lever at the bottom, it opened it up. The Maynard was the first, fired a 58 caliber bullet. It's the first one that was breech fed that had the metallic cartridge like we know of today. You'd actually load that from the back, close that back up. Therefore, when the cavalry was on their horses, the gun would be hanging to their side. They could actually pick the gun up with the horse on reins on this hand. They could fire the gun with the right hand. They could drop the gun down, or if they needed to fire again, they could actually come up and hold the reins with the gun, still control the horse. They could eject the shell out, reach in, put another one in, cock the gun again. They could reach down, prime it with another cap. Still took a percussion cap. Because in the back of the bullet, in the center, was a very tiny hole where the sparks from the cap would cause the powder to go off and send the shell down range. And when they did not need it, they could just throw it down to the side and continue on, but they still have control of the horse on this side. Then we go into the Spencer. The Spencer was one of the first, what they could really call repeating, because actually it was breech fed, used a metallic cartridge, but what it did is it has a tube on the back of the stock. You slide your cartridges in, the rod that would go down and lock it into place. So now, when you activated the lever, it pulled the shell up in, metallic cartridge, loaded it, back, cock it, and you're ready to fire. So you actually had about 5 rounds, I believe, in the stock, and that you actually fire one after another. They were accurate for pretty decent distances. As you see, when they come through, all these have the rifling into them so that they get the distance, they get your accuracy. One of the things that following the flintlocks throughout the war, there was a lot of weapons out there available for people to use, even though they were not used. The government, generals and that, did not want the expense of the ammunition to fill the guns. So your lever actions, your multi-repeaters and that were not introduced till late in the war, and they were not used that often. They mandated that people went out to the war with single shots, because that way they could keep up with the ammunition. Yeah. I'll go to the next one. One I don't have displayed here is what they call the Whitworth. Whitworth was one that come out from overseas, and it was a long octagon barrel, and it was used mainly by Confederate troops into the sharpshooters, snipers, as we know today. There were not a lot of them in the war, but there was some in there, and they were used quite efficiently as long-distance shooting. They were hitting targets up to 1,000 to 1,500 yards. Next is one of the most famous rifles, the Henry. It was the repeating rifle that pretty much started everything. They did have them in the war. They actually had commanders that actually bought them for their troops personally and outfitted them so that they could use them. The Henry was known by the Confederates as that damn Yankee gun that they could load on Sunday and shoot all week. It held 15 bullets in the magazine. So you get a group of people up against a group of Henrys, and they had some serious troubles with single shots. One thing with Henry, a lot of people don't realize is Henry was named after the toolsmith of the factory. Also involved with Henry, some other well-known names that came along to weapons since then, and that is Smith & Wesson and also Winchester were all involved in the making of the Henry, which led to the Winchester of today. They have Horace Smith, Dan Wesson, and Oliver Winchester. They went into the Volcanic Rifle Company. Then Smith & Wesson stepped out to become their own Smith & Wesson Pistol Company, and Winchester moved it to New Haven, Connecticut, where their factory still remains today. Time.
What's the sign?
7:20.
Hmm?
7:20.
Left.
You're at 7:20.
Okay. The Colt revolving rifle. There were not a lot of the Colt revolving rifles. It basically looked like a pistol with a long barrel onto it with a long stock. They did have them in the Civil War. They did not use a lot of them because they did have problems with them. Some of their sharpshooter units used them, but they had to be extremely careful because of what they call cook-offs. With the way that it was set up with that chamber, you inadvertently could fire that gun and the powder could come back to the cylinder and catch multiple cylinders at the same time. So you'd actually have bullets coming out of the side of the gun. So they had to be extremely careful with them, so it was not one that they put out to the main troops. But they were there. Another one that a lot of people don't realize it is there, and that was a Palmer bolt action that did come out during the Civil War. It actually activated, you had to turn the lever in the back counterclockwise, which allowed the bolt to come back and go back forward. We put that in there just to show that some of these weapons were in through it, and the latter half, 1861 to 65, they were there. They just were not used in mass forces. Now, in a long line of the muzzle loaders, of the flintlocks and that, they designed a Hawkins brothers out of Lancaster, PA, decided to back in the flintlocks, the muzzle loaders back here, they needed one that was more to the line of the frontiersmen. So they developed the Hawkins, which basically, it was a shorter version, hexagon barrel, but it was a 54 caliber, so it was more aligned for hunting and that, and for the frontiersmen. Then we'll go in to the pistols. Flintlock pistol that had a large caliber. It worked the same as the rifles, a single shot. And they also had the percussion. This is 54 caliber. That's a little bit bigger. This is percussion cap. Loaded the same as the rifles, but it's just a percussion cap compared to the flintlock. A lot of times these were referred as horse pistols. Cavalry would carry these, and they would pull them with an oncoming horse charge and shoot to hit a horse, because it would take out 2-3 riders on both sides when they did. And it would break up the charge of the oncoming horses. But they were only good for one, and after that they weren't used that much. Next, we're going to go into the pistols of the revolvers. The Colt Navy revolver, 36 caliber. Yep. The Navy Colt did not have the bridge across the top. Their rear sight was in the hammer itself, and then the front sight. They also had a Colt Army that came out, which was basically the same, but it was 44 caliber. The idea of the pistols, the infantry did not actually use the pistols other than the officers and cavalry, just for the simple fact that anybody that has worked with these guns, once you fire these guns, it could take you close to 10 minutes to reload it completely, because you have to break the gun down, load it, put the caps on it. It's not an easy process. Putting powder in, then put the ball in, and you have to do each one separately to fire it again. So once they were fired off, they were done until they got back to camp, until they were able to reload it. Infantry, if they come across them on the ground, they might have used them. Then came the Remington revolver, which had the bridge across the top, 44 caliber in the Army. The sight was a groove along the edge of the bridge, across the top of the bridge. They also had the Navy, that also was loaded and ran the same way. I believe the Navy was a 36 caliber, but set up the same way as the 44. Pretty much how much time we got?
Okay.
You're good on time.
I'm on it.
The other thing we wanted to cover real quick is the evolution of firearms when you go from your flintlock all the way back through to the end of the war. You see, we went from the flintlock smoothbore to the rifle barrels, distance, the accuracy. Then they come out through the Winchester repeaters, came in after the war. One thing in the 90s, 1890s and that, it led to what they call the Springfield trapdoor, which was breech-fed metallic cartridge center fire just like we have today. This was adopted by the troops in the Army, and this was actually used by Custer against the repeating rifles that the Indians had. They also led into the Colt Peacemaker and the Winchester 1866, which is what everybody considers the Winchester 1866 is the lever action that started the new age of rifles. Got any time at all? Okay. We have one that is called a Lamont pistol. At the time of the Civil War, a commodity extremely heavy and bulky. It's up in the corner of that screen. They carried 9 shots of 42 caliber with a 20 gauge shotgun underneath it. It was very heavy, cumbersome. Anybody that carried them at the time was required to make their own ammunition because the military couldn't supply the odd caliber of weapons that they were using. Later on, it came out with a lighter model, a 36 caliber with a 28 gauge shotgun underneath it. But the idea today was to show an evolution of the weapons throughout the war as to how they formed the weapons of today and how they changed everything with the rifling and the accuracy of the weapons. We good done?
10 minutes left.
Hopefully in less. Or you want to open it to questions?
No, right now, you're good.
Hmm?
No questions yet.
No questions yet. Let's see what else we can cover here. Other than the different size of the balls of the different weapons, not going to be able to actually see them, but there's all different sizes. The 36, the 54, the 44, and this is a conical 44. The one thing with this Maynard is an idea with the Maynard too. The one thing with the bullet, what it did is a French inventor, last name of Mini, designed this mini ball, which really wasn't all that mini. And it had a devastating effect because what had happened is fired in a barrel with rifling into it, it would expand and it would run through that rifling and it would project this bullet farther down range. So this also helped increase the accuracy of these rifles during the Civil War and through which they still use the rifling today. It has a pocket in the back, so when the powder explodes, the backside of this bullet will expand out and catch into the rifling and run through along the rifling. Much like today's rifling does. Yeah, we're way up on that.
Okay.
See what else we can. So as you see with, we're done with all that.
Okay.
Don't even go to them. That's the end of them. I could talk about them, but I ain't gonna have them with me. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and go there.
Okay.
I'll cover those two. Okay. This is a picture of a Confederate Bowie knife. The idea with knives in the Civil War is most of the knives that came about was brought from home. The Union did not issue a, okay. They did not actually issue a knife. Now the Confederate did. They issued a D-guard knife that they could carry. As the war got carried on, they got rid of those heavy knives and went into smaller knives. One thing that is really nice that a lot of people don't realize is during the Civil War, one of the favorite knives of the soldiers, a pocket knife, which is very similar to today's knives. In fact, it's just a single blade, it does not lock. A lot of the knives went through the swords. You click that again, there's another one on there. The swords are pretty much the same as they have been through history. Their artillery sword looked almost like the Roman gladius. You've got Confederate sabers that when you actually get up close to them, they look, the officer swords, they look just like the Marine swords today. They've carried through history looking about the same. Back up to that one with the grenades. Something that a lot of people don't realize too is grenades. They actually were used during the Civil War. They actually lofted them out, and upon impact, the plunger would activate the explosive. A little different from what today's are, but they still used them then. I believe in World War I they still had the plunger grenades. I want to thank everybody for coming. We are going to, like Ron said, this is going to be the first of the series. In the future, we would like to set up and have one on uniforms of both North and South, equipment, artillery, probably run another one on the cutlery that was used. But just during all this epidemic and everything, we wish everybody stay safe. And by all means, if you have any questions, let us know. If we don't have the answers today, we will definitely get back with you and answer any questions that you may have. Other than that, I guess that's about it.
So I apologize for the technical difficulties we had during this. This was our trial run with it. So we're learning some things, and hopefully for the next time we'll be able to improve it. But we are going to try to repost this both on Facebook and maybe the Zoom version, but we'll see if we can salvage the Zoom version. I do appreciate you guys hanging on with us through it.